I was a non-believer too until I lived in Israel and tried it. It's like tuna and pineapple is a good pizza. Yeah. All right, 24. Chapter 24. Here is the last narrative bit. Here is the making of the covenant, okay? The ritual. It's really two stories probably that are squeezed together because there seem to be tensions. At one part of the story, Moses and like 70 elders eat with God halfway up the hill. And at the other story, it's at the foot of the hill, and it's got to do with spilling blood. So it's probably two different versions that have been kind of bound together. So it starts. He said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you," this is God of course speaking, "you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of the Israel, and worship afar off. Moses alone shall come near to the Lord, but the others shall not come near, and the people shall not come up with them." Then skip to verse 9. Because here's the rest of that story. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. And he did not lay his hand on the chief men of the people. They beheld God and ate and drank. Now that's kind of funky in that I've been telling you, nobody sees the face of God and lives. It's a quasi-seeing God. Because notice the reference to, they saw the pavement at his feet. They saw that God is standing on something, and the platform he stands on is like sapphire, like the heavens for clearness. So it doesn't really describe God, notice, huh? And they ate, and so there's a sacrifice, and so what we call this a communion sacrifice, because part of the animal was offered to God, as if God eats, and then the human beings eat. So it is in a sense a seed of what we as Catholics think about when we think about the Eucharist. Huh? We dine with God. We dine on God. We do. But in the sense that a communion sacrifice. So then let's read the stuff in between. Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances. Words. Again, that's the word. That's the term for the Ten Commandments. They're called the Decalogue. Remember, that logos is word. Deca, the 10 words. Okay? So in Hebrew they use the word debrim, but it's the same. It's word. So the term word stands for the 10, and the commandments or ordinances, that's the word for all. That's the term for all the other rules that Moses brought down. Okay? And all the people answered with one voice and said, "All the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do." You know, they said that earlier, back in chapter 19, before God said anything. But now they've heard it all. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall make no images of other living things." And they said, "All the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do." And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and he rose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes. And he sent young men of the people of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and half of the blood he threw against the altar. So the altar, this pile of stones, is the visual representation, the image of God. Okay? So the blood, half of it gets poured on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of the people. So the book of the covenant is all of these laws that he's written down now. Both the 10 and all the casuistic laws. And he reads it to them, and they say, verse 7, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will be obedient." Third time. And Moses took the blood and threw it upon the people and said, "Behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." So the blood is on the altar, the blood is on the people that binds them together. Think about what blood does. The ancients didn't, they weren't medical people in a modern sense, but they knew that blood was important in keeping alive, in circulating. I don't know what they knew about circulating food and pulling away waste. I don't know what they knew about that. But as long as the blood circulates, we're alive. If you tighten off, a cincture off your hand, it will die without that blood. So the splashing of blood is a kind of a bonding between God and his people, back and forth. It also is an indelible mark. I mean, it's going to be hard to get off that clothing, huh? So it's a sign, too, of that which binds them. This is the making of a covenant. Now, we're going to see other examples, but this is the making of the covenant at Sinai. And the prophets will refer to this. Jesus talks about. He takes a cup and says, this is the cup of the new and everlasting covenant in my blood. Okay? So blood is a key element in the making of a covenant. Let me look here. What do I have to say? I think Israel has said, everything, all these words we will do. It's kind of giving God a blank check. And God, again, they didn't have to do this. Yahweh brought them from slavery, but he said, now, if you want to continue with me, here's the arrangement that we will be bound together in a kind of a relationship. Yahweh initiates the covenant, but still the distance is not removed. They can't see God face to face. The pile of stones is what the stand-in for God. Only later will the full treaty language develop. On the back, again, of the Hammurabi page, on the lower left-hand corner, we have the structure of a suzerainty treaty. When we get to Deuteronomy, this will become important. So save this until we get to Deuteronomy. Because the book of Deuteronomy is laid out in a structure that corresponds to how kings made agreement with each other. Okay? So this language of covenant will develop. All right? What will follow next in our final lesson for the day is the building of the ark and the tent, so that right living, justice, and right worship and the temple will be seen as one thing. One thing. Questions?
I have one.
Yeah.
When you say listen and obey between master and slave, it's the same thing everywhere. God. So what? Can you use a different language? I mean, like God and people needs to listen and obey.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, the Jews would certainly say that. Yes. But anytime Paul will say, wives, obey your husbands. But it's listen. Listen. And I would argue, and men, listen to your wives. In fact, Paul says in Ephesians, before we get that, he says, we should all submit ourselves one to another. Not males and females, not males over females, but we should, as Christians, all be submissive one to another, to lend our ear, to render our ear, to be attentive, to respond to their needs and their requests.
So language is the same?
Yeah. Yes. Latin is where we get obey from. That's why I use Latin. Obedire, audire, but it's true in other cultures too. Yes?
How much of this law business is in our lectionary?
Not too much. The Ten Commandments appear. Maybe a couple of those that refer, the lectionary, our current lectionary was shaped in the 60s. And what was going on in the world? Oh my gosh. Concern about races, about war and peace, about social justice. And so the pieces that were selected tend to be those that emphasize, again, there's not many of them, but when it does appear, emphasis on care for widows and orphans and strangers. Those kind of social justice-y kind of texts are the ones that we tend to hear in the lectionary.
Another question?
Yes.
Chapter 23:11, is that a form of gleaning?
Yes, it is a form of gleaning, and we'll see that more. There'll be other, in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus, there will be the rule that when you harvest your crops, you shall not pick everything. You shouldn't take every grape off the vine, not every olive off the tree. If you're collecting grain and you leave some of the grain behind, a half of a shock, you leave it. Because the poor are just waiting. They're on the edges of the forest, of the field, waiting for you to get done so that they can glean. So again, it's not so apparent here, but we'll hear it repeated in more rules in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And that will be important in other parts of the Old Testament, because that was what they had as a social net for the poor. What else? Yes?
When you were talking about slaves earlier on, I couldn't help but think it sounded like an employment contract, not really slaves as you would really think about it.
Well, again, our vision as Americans of slavery has been shaped by black slavery in the South. That was a very harsh and unusual practice. They still call it slavery, but it was more like indentured. You were in debt. You had fallen in debt, and so you had to work it off. That is the better sense of the Old Testament vision of slavery. But slavery changes in different cultures and different climates. So we got to be careful, because American slavery is a particularly harsh kind of slavery. Ancient Roman slavery could be really harsh, or it could be really beneficial. Most Romans freed their slaves. After so many years. That was the big trend in Rome. But other cultures didn't. They worked them to death. So it's a complex cultural phenomenon. Other questions?
Any idea how in chapter 21, 5, 6, where the slave decides he's not going to be free because he loves his wife and he loves his master?
Mm-hmm.
How common was that?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
No
Clue.
idea.
No clue.
It seems kind of odd, because he'd want to be free, but yet if he has that love for his children, his wife, his master, maybe it's worth it to be a slave.
And also if the master was a genteel kind of guy,
not so bad.
It could be worse. There are times where at least you're part of a bigger operation with a man who's got means. Because once you're no longer a slave, you're on your own. You have to earn a living, plant a crop. You have to acquire capital. That can be really daunting. And I suspect in some cases, if you found working with the master wasn't too terribly onerous, that was considered a safer bet.
It's also incentive for the master to be good to his slaves.
You get more labor. Good point. Good point. Okay? We've got a half an hour before lunch, so we're going to take a little break, and then we'll do our next little small group. Okay?